And so global skills and global opportunities, how to build a CV for an international career. One of the things that people, if you're going to build a CV, is that a lot of people right now think, this is my opinion also, that everything can be done by AI. You could just create it, you can just chat GTP it, you could do whatever is the most newest version of that and get something. But what you forget if you do that is that it's the content in there and not really it's layout and so on that matters the most. It's really, the weight you have to it. So as this guy, Eric Partaker said, I follow him on LinkedIn. He's a CEO coach, and your greatest skill isn't on your resume. It's in how you show up every day. Be the person who makes things easier, not harder. And so it is what you do over time that will also matter. And as I will point out, for most jobs, you will need somebody to vouch for you in addition to the CV. But so the quality is in what you have there, not the layout per se. And one of the things that I want, that I think in the current age that you hear more and more, is that people are looking for employees that are agile, people that can handle transitions. Things are changing very fast these days. And I think it's important for you to sell that aspect of your career to recruiters, to the companies you contact, that you are able to handle transition. So, for example, when I write letters for IMFSE students, I always emphasize that you have been able to go from one city to another and start a new semester time over, so that, which is a skill in by itself, it means that you are able to perform in a new place from the start. So this is, important if somebody thinks, if the, because in most situation, it will be an international hire. I mean, you will be an international hire. So you need to tell them that, hey, I've done this before. I've been able to deal with finding apartment and dealing with going shopping, whatever is needed, establishing some friend base and deliver at work. This is something I've done on a regular basis in the IMFSE. It's also right now, and then this is an oldie but goodie. Don't know if I click it, it'll go to YouTube and have some links, but it's what it shows is Tom Brady, who maybe is arguably the best quarterback in history. And when he did his, he was barely drafted for the NFL, partly because he was not very fast, and it shows like a 40-yard run with him, and he's really not that fast. But what they realized, that it's a lot of broader aspects that is needed to be a good quarterback. And eventually, he has, as they say, he has more Super Bowl titles than other teams altogether. And the point, and I think this is, again, more and more important in the current times, it is that you have more than one set of skills. So do emphasize, and also, have those skills. Don't, cannot lie, about it, but do work on your communication, work on your, say, coding, work on your courses, work on other skills, be active in societies, show that you have more to bring to the plate than, say, like, it could be, sometimes it's surprising because it could be somebody comes with fantastic grades and the recruiters will look like, yeah, that person has nothing else than being good in courses. They don't have anything to bring. They're not innovative. They're not creative. If I gave them something that is not a classic book, textbook example of what to do, they wouldn't know, how to do. And this, and this also emphasized the importance, I think, of your thesis projects, that this is also a way to show that you have skills to solve something that is not a course. Because in the end, what one of the main things that a thesis project does, it shows that you can take a project on, read stuff, carry out work, whether it's experimental, numerical, and then write a report on time and get it done. And this is more or less what engineering jobs are about. So make sure that for your thesis that this is again a way to shine. And it's not about the topic. It's not about whether it's on batteries or mass timber or evacuation or wildfires. It is the fact that you're able to take on a challenging and relevant problem, something that hasn't been done, and deal with it in a allotted time. So a little bit going back to me, like how my career unfolded. So, that dates me, but about 30 years ago, I decided, I'd started to study to become a primary school teacher. And I'm like, oh, I'm going to be finished. I'm 21 or so, and I don't think I want to be a primary school teacher for 46 years. I love to teach, a lot of vacation, a lot of freedom. But in the end, I decided to study more because I enjoyed learning. I joined science. Maybe it will provide some more mobility. So I went to the US at the University of Maryland. And, I assume most of you have also experienced what Rudyard Kipling says here, what should they of England know, who only England knows? Basically, that once you've been abroad from your own country, you probably understand your own country a lot better when you see different cultures and different countries, political, financial systems. And this is again something that you should bring with you. And you can see up in the top corner, I put reference letter. So one of the things that I've managed to do is that for every place I've been, whether it's a summer internship or studying, I've made sure that I have somebody that can write a reference letter for me. So from this time, Jose Torrero was a teacher and a professor at the University of Maryland at the time, and he's written many reference letters for me over the years. So find somebody that you know well enough and trust that they can write a good reference letter for you. And even discuss that with them in advance, because then they may ask to get to know you a bit better now rather than 2 minutes before you need a letter because you're applying for a job. And then I worked, after my bachelor's, I worked 1 year in combustion science and engineering, did a lot of different work on self-heating. Some of this stuff is and Rick Roby, the CEO there, he wrote a letter for me when I applied for my job at DTU, when I applied for a job at University of Edinburgh, and also in my current job, he's written letters to support me. And then also think of, if you have work experience, how you present it in your CV in the context. What is important for your employer from where you work? So the CV needs to be fitting to what you're applying for, because in some CV, maybe this, if I was applying for a forensic job, then it's important for me to write that, yes, I did a lot of studies that are related to forensics, and I wrote those type of reports. That is not so important if I was applying for an academic job. Then they focus more on funding, teaching experience, articles that are written. So then after, I enjoyed the job, but people often ask, oh, how do you think about your career? Would you do a PhD eventually? Because that is often what's required in the field that I was working, say high-end engineering, legal, forensic work. So I had some, say, easy options for what to do. I could probably stay at University of Maryland, where I was the top graduating student. Maybe WPI, I knew people there. Jose had left for Edinburgh and was looking for PhD students, but I took a chance on myself and say I want to make it hard and say the handshake is the striking the deal with the devil. So I ended up applying for Harvard and Princeton. I didn't apply for MIT, Stanford, because I wanted to do academic job, and Harvard and Princeton were much more known for creating academics. So I went and I worked very, very hard for 6 years. And again, the emphasis here is that sometimes you got to take on something that is challenging, something that will, you know, give you credentials for later on. You got to suffer. Sometimes, you got to take on, you got to do the hard work. And maybe that is not, take in that you're getting the dream job right away, but maybe take a job somewhere that will qualify you and give you credentials for the future. So I did thousands of experiments in the lab, worked very, very many hours, and became an expert on a topic. And these are expanding spherical flames. There's gas mixed in a chamber and a high-speed camera taking photos. And I studied both the velocity, but also predominantly the onset of these instabilities and how that accelerated the flame and so on. And learned all kinds of difference between stable, unstable, turbulent flame, and wrote papers, and became an expert. And of course, if for a career, also career advice, I would say that a lot of, some of you may consider doing a PhD, and I think it's important that you, for yourself, then think of why you're doing the job. And that's for all jobs. My advice is always to only apply for jobs that you really want. Don't apply for jobs that you have no idea what it's going to be like, or in a place that you consider that you probably wouldn't like living. So people end up applying for way too many jobs, and without thinking of what is actually going to be, So again, the point here is that when I, signed up for what turns out to be 6 years as a PhD student, because in the US you start directly from a bachelor's and do a master's on the way to the PhD, probably I didn't know exactly what it was like, but it was definitely a lot of things that others didn't think it was. One of the things also that I like to emphasize on this is that many people think that if they do a PhD, if they do more studies, it's not meaningful and they won't get job, and it's only jobs in academia. But if you look in college, more than probably more than 50% of people with a PhD are not in research and academia, and you will see this in many consulting firms that are people there also with PhDs. So sort of the key insight for building your career is to do your due diligence, do things deliberately, have a plan for what you do, apply for the jobs you want, follow up, do not leave it to others to look after you. The people will often say, oh yeah, don't worry, I'll take care of this for you, and so on. People don't take care of you. People cannot change an economic downturn. People cannot change a hiring freeze in a company and so on. So you have to be prepared, and you are the one that has to look after yourself. Accept the terms of the deal. There's going to be some suffering. There's going to be some changes. Be prepared for it and suck it up. And then while you're doing, say in your first job, become an expert, and then you can use that as leverage for a new job instead of just saying, oh, well, this is boring, I'll try to find something new. Do what it takes and earn your credits. Anyway, so I returned to Europe. I did a postdoc at École Centrale in Paris. I did a faculty position in Copenhagen. And one of the things that I always did throughout all of that was being visible. Now you can see I'm quite visible on LinkedIn. I think this is a place where you can create some visibility these days in a work environment. But I went to conferences, I went to meetings, and one of the simplest advices for you is to right now there's a lot of webinars that you can attend to learn. There's also free conferences. There's also free other courses. So if you think about it, if you every day does something like, and that's a lot maybe, but let's say 2 days a week, you take 1 hour extra on top of what your studies or your work do. That's 100 hours per year, and in a 10-year time, that's 1,000 hours, and that's a lot. That's almost 1 year more than others. And I mean, it's nothing to be proud of, but I probably, at my current age, I probably already worked a full lifetime of work. So it is the volume of what you do that normally creates the success. It's not because you're lucky or because I was exceptional in class and so on. The say if I've had any success, the key to that is collaboration, hard work, and willing to listen to people and do extra uh, activities when it's needed. So then, I was at Old College, and one of the things, again, that people always, when the students there ask, and also IMFSE students, um, is that 6 out of 10 employers around the world give extra credit for an international student experience, according to the biggest ever survey on the subject. You can read the link, I'll share it. But this is, again, for you to be then aware of the value of your international experience. So yeah, from the report, I think this is that Microsoft and other large enterprises in the coming years had an increasing need for highly educated. The competition for talent is becoming international, and most companies therefore have a strong focus on attracting the very best Danish graduates. At Microsoft, we see graduates with international experience because our experience shows that they find it easier to engage in project work and work across multiple groups. So know your value. This is for Elon Musk. Dare to take risk and fail. It's how you recover that matters. Nobody's perfect. Nothing is going to be exactly what it is. And this could also be related to interviews. Sometimes you can yeah, or applying for jobs, you will have many negatives, you have many no's, you will have some hard no's, something you really tried hard to get a job, or you're in an interview and you felt it went well and you still didn't get a job. Get up again and then try to learn from it, try to assess. Ask people maybe for feedback if it's possible on why. So, and this is from another movie, and do not waste your talent, because I know as an IMFSE student you are very talented. Dare to be excellent. Um, you know, there's a lot of places where you can and as they say, I won't play the clip because I think actually I downloaded this, yeah. But the point is, you can watch it later when I share the slides. It's from Good Will Hunting, and when Ben Affleck says it to Matt Damon, where Matt Damon, assume whether you've seen the movie or not, this very very smart or genius, he's a genius basically. And Matt Damon said, "Oh, why is it always this? You owe it to me, because they're working there as construction workers." That I owe it to myself. And then Ben Affleck says, "No, you don't owe it to you. You owe it to me because you have a talent that me and that I and the other workers here don't have. So I be some explicit language, kill you if you 10 years from now you're here at the construction site with me because you have what it takes to do something different, and we're all cheering for you." And I think so go and do it, take a chance, don't be timid, and dare to be excellent. And I think this is, you probably have some fan support from family and friends, former schoolmates in your home countries, that you've gone to the IMFSE and created a path. So take, value that opportunity and dare to be excellent, dare to study hard, dare to do well, and you'll be in an outstanding position for very good jobs. Okay, that was it. So building a career, this is my basic points. It requires constant work and determination. Uh, Basically every day, something to learn, something to do, and then eventually you can also rest. So a few specific words about the CVs. My CV looks terrible. It's awful. And then maybe this is where I eat my own words. And I never seem to be updating it from a looks point of view. However, it hasn't prevented me from getting the jobs that I had so far. And I've gotten most of the jobs that I applied for. And I've gotten to interviews in more or less all jobs I ever applied for. And the point I'm saying is that it's the content that people are looking for. It is not whether it's glossy or organized in a way, a great photo for the CV and so on. I never have a photo on my CV unless it's strictly required in some Europass format or something. What matters the most, I think, is the sequence, because you only have a few seconds. You probably don't even have half a minute for people to look at CV in, if you're applying for the big companies and so on and so forth. And this, if you're applying without already having talked with people. So I'm going to take a sidestep, and that's why going to the career fairs, getting to know people via like commenting on LinkedIn, following people, seeing their post, knowing what they're after at Arup or OFR or Stantec, Jensen Hughes, so on. Get some people in the companies. Set up a meeting even with former IMFC students working in those relevant companies. Because anyway, you normally just have a few seconds of attention. They have a big pile if you're applying for a job and they don't know you already. So what is the sequence that matters? For example, I mean, the basic thing is, if I had a Nobel Prize, I think I'd put that first. I think I put that first on my CV if I had it. Whether it's in ChatGPT tells you that you should start with your work experience and you should then go on with the education come later on. And one of the things related to this is, for example, you apply for a summer internship now, and it's not through, completely through IMFSE. One of the first things you should put is, I have a work permit or residence permit that allows me to work in the EU or the UK, whatever. I have a pre-settled status, I have a visa, I have, this and this. These are things that matters a lot. And then I think in your case, unless, for most of you, the IMFSE should come. So this is also a small detail. That's why you start with the news first, because maybe if you start with your bachelor's and then something and something, you go completely chronological about it, then they don't get to the IMFSE. Put the IMFSE first. And because most employers that are looking in your field will know what the IMFSE is. And then key information must be very visible. So although my CV is not elegant, I try to be very structured in it. So I have, headers with experience, education, papers, whatever categories. And lately I've been putting some awards a bit higher up. Maybe put if you have a lot of work experience, maybe put a little bit of a few sentences about who you are as a worker, those kind of things. So basically, you should be able to do it sort of the Asian way, that I say, that you hand it over with two hands, right? You should be proud of it. It should be your best work. Spend time reading it. Ask people to take a look at it and comment on it. Ask, people like me, people, some of your teachers, whatever, former IMFC students that work in the company. Hey, can you take a look at my CV? Do you think there's anything to advise me on? So basically that, show respect for the ones receiving it, and no mistakes. You cannot have spelling mistakes in your CV. You just cannot. So just make sure you take care of those things. And then AI and ChatGPT as assistants, I honestly don't know why. I mean, your CV, I forgot to say that your CV at this point should be one, for most of you, should be one page. If it's two, then yes, okay, you print it, you can turn it. It should not be exceeding two for sure. But try to think of it again, what's important and what do they need to know about you to call you for an interview, a conversation, to get to know you better. And for that's what I'm saying. Like, I don't know, and maybe that's where I'm stupid, but where AI and ChatGPT will help you, of course, you get that. I mean, it's like you can use it for asking like you would ask a friend, but I think still a friend would do better, because it is not the statistical, it's not the statistical average of what's needed. It is more what, being unique is more important than doing exactly what others are doing. And that said, I do make a difference between, say, Google and AI here. A lot of people tend to call everything that existed way before AI became a thing for AI. Of course, you can Google, you can look up the company, you can learn about it, you can see if they have specific requirements and so on that you should put into the CV and so on. But to have it AI generated, it will very easily be flagged. And I think probably at this point, if you submit it electronically, to Dropbox, they probably have AI screening tools uh, in their HR department. So interviews. Here, possibly some of the AI could be, or could be, or electronic research can be very good. You can, well, look on techniques. You can most common interview questions and answer. However, what you will find when you do that is that most of those questions are like, okay, that's very basic. And I've been in that position myself. When I interviewed for my job as the BRE chair, the professor at the University of Edinburgh, I went into the interview and it was a big, at the old college, it was a big oval table. There was, I think, 10 people on the one half of it, and then a cup of water and a chair for me on the other half. And there was 1 hour interview, and all of them, it was the vice chancellor, the rector of the university, the head of the college, the head of School of Engineering, the head of the discipline, the teaching, another professor, somebody from BRE, somebody from another university, people from HR, people from teaching. And they all asked me questions. All of them had like one question that they were asking me. And afterwards, people asked, oh, what did they ask? I was like, pretty much those basic questions that, you can find. However, they were all in a context. They were all in the context of that role. So they were all tweaked so that I couldn't necessarily recognize them as such. You know, the 5 year, when they asked me for your 5 year plan, it was the 5 year plan but with a little twist so it wasn't generic. There was always in a little bit of a context, a little bit of a tweak, so that any pre-programmed answers would be flagged, basically. And all of you have been to the IMFSE interviews, and at this point, I think often the same interview questions are used by all interviewers also for some fairness, and those questions are sort of circulating. And when I interviewed for the IMFSE, if I saw that people were scripted, if I saw that people basically had another screen they were reading from, or I would just change questions, or I would change them. Oh, okay, I see you know about active versus passive fire protection. What do you think is most important in industrial setting? I would just see if people actually had understood what these things were, or if they just prepared a very scripted answer. But when you go for the interview, so put yourself in the perspective of the interviewer. What is he, she, they looking for? What do they need? And then again, first impressions matter. Being well on time, being prepared, wearing the right clothes. Even if it's online, there's nothing wrong with putting on a suit and a tie for an interview, even if it's online, or whatever appropriate clothing is. But more importantly is understand what the job is truly about. Study for it. It is an exam, and you'll probably be nervous. So try to handle them, and often the best way to handle nerves is to be well prepared. But learn about the company. Why they will invariably ask, why do you want to work with us? And it's like, oh, because you pay well. Like, okay, boo. Oh, because my friend worked there. Boo. Oh, because I heard it's really great. So, be really well prepared for this. And they say, okay, yeah, so you heard it's nice to work here, but what particularly do you think? Why do you think it will fit for you? Why is this company, why is OFR better for you than design fire consultants? What is it in that we do that makes you think that you will fit better with us? Those are the level of details that you need to know. And then learn from it. There's going to be many interviews, not from the outcome though, but analyze based on the information you had at the time. I learned this from people in investment, where they say a lot of people say, "Oh, I should have bought Amazon stocks 10 years ago. I would have been rich now." Or I should have done Google. Or I should have bought Nvidia stocks. Or I should have done this. And gold's been up. I should have bought that. Those are based on the outcome. It's like saying, "Oh, I should have bought that lottery tickets, put those numbers down and won it." Because if you're not, you need to be in the position to know, like, for example, the interview turns out to be different, that they have some needs that you couldn't meet. And then you analyze, or you weren't prepared. So then you analyze based on what did you do? And don't beat yourself up if it turns out that they are mean or asking for something that really wasn't what you prepared for, and they told you to prepare for. Then it's just what it is, and learn from that and say, hey, okay, I need to be prepared for that, and for the unknown, the unknown unknowns. So it is some sort of role play. So only be yourself when it's the best option to be completely natural. I've had interviews where maybe I did, you've probably seen some of these things where people don't want a job. There is in Goodwill Hunting too, it's Matt Damon sends Ben Affleck to go for a job interview for him, or there's from Trainspotting, there's the guy going completely high going to the interview and for one of his friends, and don't really want a job. But sometimes, am I encouraging you to lie? Well, white lies are okay. Don't be too honest with certain things. For example, you go and they ask, "Oh, what do you think about our organizational structure?" And maybe a poor example, but you may think that their organizational structure is terrible. But it's not the time to say that. It's a sign. Oh well, I think that's gonna be fine. I'll be happy to work with that. I've heard from others that this is a nice way to organize the work. Or how how are you interested in doing this modeling too? And maybe you're not interested in modeling, but in the interview, just like, yeah, if the opportunity comes up, I'm of course willing to do that. It's not what I've done the most, but I have a affinity for learning things, and I would see that as an interesting challenge to take on. So uh, because the other opportunity is like, oh, I don't know anything about it, and I'm actually not interested in it. So yeah, if you might as well say, so if that's what the job is about, then don't hire me. Well, if you're going to say that in an interview, don't go to the job in the first place. You can make that decision afterwards, but don't make the decision for them in the interview. Make the decision afterwards if you know, learn something during the interview process that, well, actually, I thought the company was more like this or the role was more like this, but in the end, it's very different. Then it's fair, you know, they can choose you, you can choose them. You're not committed to them just because you have been to an interview. And many of you, I know from many recent years that people in your position may have 2, 3, 4 interviews in a few weeks' time, and somebody's going to be saying, "Hey, we need to know an answer from you tomorrow," and then it's like, well, I need to wait a little bit. It's a big decision for me, you know, to do this relocation in a new country and so on. And it's nothing wrong to say I've also been to some other interviews and I'm considering different options. And so with that, that was basically a short, not so short, but a starting point for where you can ask me some questions, and you can ask me any question you want that is perfectly personal or more general.
Thank you so much, Doctor, for the presentation. It's really helpful. So it's time for you guys to ask your questions. As a starter, I will start with a question from my side. For the CV, how to make it stand out? Like, what's the interviewer or the employer looks in the CV the first time they look at it?
And again, it's, you know, if you want to highlight something, then I think if you have great, you know, if you have exceptional grades, it doesn't hurt to put certain grades in, or that you've done well in courses. Now, you know, depending a little bit, you know, if you know that, for example, in your context, IMFSE context, if you know that the company you're applying for knows the IMFSE, then it's probably not necessary, for example, to write down which courses you've taken. But it probably could be important to show, you know, that you've been semester 1 in Ghent, semester 2 in Lund, semester 3 in Spain, semester 4 where you do your thesis and who's your supervisor, something like that. Certain context also, and more so for, so I would say, you know, I'm FSC, and I would put the 4 semesters where you've been, for people to get a context of your mobility. And you could probably put a couple of bullet points where you say focus was on these and these, you know, structural engineering, focus was on you know, performance-based design, lab work, risk analysis, and, you know, like a couple of keywords for each one of those. I think it's also, you know, in order to stand out, you know, to write, you know, often people write this, you know, a little bit of setting, highly motivated thing, and this and this personality type. I don't know whether this really, you know, I've read a lot of CVs, and in the end, for me, I don't really read that, because you know, if you can't write something that praises yourself, then well, you know, you should be probably not doing it. And right, these days you can probably also, people do it with AI and write something that is just completely amazing and the right thing to put there. And that's what I'm saying. That's when the right thing becomes the wrong thing. It's like, you know, it's like you know, because it's a statistical tool. So if I say in football that the most scored goal is to shoot to the left, then all of the goal is just starting to go that way, and the players then it's not the best thing anymore. So that's the danger with the statistical tool. It makes everyone use the word underscore, where most naturally for people is to say that something's been highlighted. But underscore now, if somebody use underscore, I know they've done something with AI. And there's certain keywords in CVs, I think, that people will flag immediately. So what else, I do think, for a one-page CV in your category, I say, I haven't done photos. I think I would include a photo. A professional photo. It shows something, and don't AI it so that you look like Brad Pitt or something. But it's something because these days, and for some of you, and myself included, if you have a name that is not necessarily completely known for people, because you come, then it's good for them to see, who's this person and how do they present themselves in that sense. And other than that, I think language requirement, classically at the bottom, but or somewhere to highlight that you're, say, fluent in English and solid written verbal skills in English. I think will be key for you in many cases. And then you read also, you hear people, they're always like, well, the students are all the same, so we look a little bit for a personality. So, what do you do outside? What kind of do you run? Do you do sports? Do you play music? Do you do theater? Whatever. And if you have, but don't be too interesting. They don't need to know about your completely weird hobbies. I'm. Uh, you can keep it normal, but again, somebody that they say, oh yeah, we have a runners club, or we have a chess club, or we have whatever. We like people that bake because they bring in cake to the office. But just shows that you're a little bit of who you are and that you dare to share a little bit about your personality.
Okay, that's so good. So, for you guys, do you have any questions? Like, open your mics
Oh,
and
and
go
one
on.
one more thing while I
Okay.
remember. So I always put references available up on request,
Okay.
for the jobs. But I would also say that you should, when you apply for job, when you get to applying for jobs, and you can even start now with asking people, can you serve as a reference? And then when you apply for jobs, make sure that you tell these people that I'm actively applying for jobs now. Because it has happened for me that I've said yes, like I was head of studies and say, yeah, sure, use me as a reference. And then I didn't know people were applying, and I get a call, I get a phone call from HR at Arup, and they're like, hey, I want to ask you a question about this person. And I'm like, okay, that's from 3 years ago. I do kind of remember who that person is. I didn't know they were applying for a job. So keep people in the loop about which jobs you're applying for, who they may, if you put names on, um, that they may expect a call, or because sometimes they just call.
Yeah.
Otherwise, they may set up by email or something. But yeah.
Okay. So your advice here is like, whenever I apply for a new job, I should tell my reference that I'm already applying for a new job, right?
Well, it's okay if you're just saying like, hey, it's okay for me to put you as a reference. I'll be applying for a range of jobs. You don't have to email them 15 emails, but if you already have a plan, in that one email you send, you can say, hey, I'm applying for these, for Semper and Astute and DFC and Jensen Hughes and Fire Risk Alliance, whatever company it is. Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. Thank you. Okay, Juan, it's all yours.
Hello, thank you very much for the words. I have one question regarding the cover letter, and I think this is kind of an opportunity to show you a little bit more. But then I have a conflict between, should I go like too technical, or should I go very, very technically specific, or more like personality, soft skill oriented? Because then it will be like too long talking, and then too egotistical to talk like me, 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 me.
So first of all, your cover letter should not be even a full page, I think, for you at this stage. For the jobs you are applying for, it is a cover letter. And so it's a cover letter, so it's not you writing your CV in text, rather in a CV format either. So it is for you to highlight who you are, what made you interested in this job, and what they should look at, particularly in your CV. So the classic thing, well, as you will see from my CV, blah 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 blah. But in addition, I have this and this and that. So it's important to not just because the pitfall is that somebody starts writing, hello, my name is Juan, I'm 27 years old or whatever from so and so, and I'm currently studying in the IMFSE program. Before the IMFSE program, they're like, that's in the CV. We looked at your CV. We can see those things, So make sure that it is really like a speed date, like something that will make them want to read your CV. Or if they have looked at your CV first, that when they look at this, they're like, oh yeah, this is something in addition to, it's an opportunity. Say you have 2 pages to impress somebody. Don't make them identical, right?
Yeah. A little bit more straightforward as well.
Yeah. And
okay. Thank you.
But and pay attention again, make it individual. When you write one for Jensen Hughes, and then you write it for OFR later on, don't just change, copy, find OFR, replace with Jensen Hughes. Do cater it a little bit, to the role. Look at what they've been specifically been looking at. Maybe some places it's for a graduate program, other places it's not for a graduate program. Those things should be structured quite differently then. Because you need to, again, white lies, you need to suck up a little bit. If it's for a graduate program, then the graduate program is the greatest thing in the world. If it's for another role, then that role is the greatest in the world. And when one phrase that I've used a few times is that in cover letters that I've written is that I find it, that I'm really excited about applying for this job because it appears to fit my qualification and interest at this current time. So you're very quickly saying both that you're interested, but also that you think personally that you're qualified for the role. You're saying that in the first sentence. I think I'm qualified, and they're like, hey, this person thinks that he or she is qualified. Let me actually see if they are. So you buy yourself maybe a minute for them to read more.
Okay, thank you very much.
And this is, again, the cover letter CV did. And the unfortunate thing about for you is that there's a lot of people applying for the jobs you're going to be applying for. There's some of them, incredible large amount of people applying for a graduate, program at OFR or ARP. The good thing, though, for you is that as a fire safety engineer these days, there's a lot of companies that are hiring. So even though, there's a lot of people in different jobs, when it all sorts itself out, there's jobs for everyone.
Thank you, Juan, for your question. So anyone else want to ask a question, but we are running out of time.
Yeah, I mean, I have time. So if people have questions.
Okay, yeah, we have a lot of people asking. So the Rage, yeah, if I'm saying it correctly, you're happy to hear your question. So go on. Yeah.
Hi, Grunde.
Hey, you're snuck in. You're not an IMFSE student.
I was.
Yeah. So tell me.
Where did you get the t-shirt from? Where can we buy that?
That's a good question. It's a very good t-shirt. It's
Yes.
from United Colors of Benetton.
Of course. Okay. Thank you.
I saw it in the window and I had to go in and get it. I thought it was a very fitting t-shirt and I decided to wear it for this session.
Very fitting, definitely. Thank you.
Okay, Yusuf, you're happy to hear your question.
Can you see me? Oh, hello.
Yeah.
Hi.
Thanks for your nice presentation. I wanted just to ask that because I'm considering or maybe prioritizing doing a PhD rather than a job. And I just wanted to know that what is let's say, because I know that there are people that saying, okay, if you get a PhD, then you might be overqualified for the jobs and companies might be more interested in master students or master graduates rather than you. I just wanted your idea about this, just to know what you think about this.
I mean, if you look at University of Edinburgh, I looked at the numbers. So University of Edinburgh have produced, what was it? Something like 85 people with PhDs in the last 20 years in fire, just at the University of Edinburgh. To the best of my knowledge, none of those are without a job. And they're not all in academia. They go, we had, part of this was also based on when we did like a PhD placement day and in Denmark. And I think companies like Covi and Rumble, like the very large companies, they have about 20% of their staff have a PhD. If you look at, I spent 7 years in Denmark. The CEO of Niras, the CEO of Covi, the CEO of Rumble, all with a PhD, I think, higher, upper management roles. It's not a bad thing. If you look at OFR, Danny Hopkin, Michael Sparepoint, plenty of people there with a PhD, also people they've hired from Edinburgh. Antonella College, who's just finished PhD. IMFSE. So I think let's turn it around. If they think it's a burden, then I think it's not the right, I think it's the wrong company. The right companies are hiring people with qualifications, and whether that's a PhD or an MBA or whatever.
Okay, very nice. Thanks for clarification.
Okay, either time, Professor, for another question?
Yeah. I'm just sitting here.
Okay, Hiba, go on. Hibatullah, go on.
Hey! You're
muted. Hibatullah, you are muted. We can't hear you, so.
You're muted. Hello,
yeah,
how are you?
Thank you so much for the informations first, Grunde. And I would like to ask, please, like, for example, if you have like a screening call, like 15 minutes to 10 minutes, what do the recruiters actually expect to hear from you? Because it's very short. So I don't think it will be too technical, but I don't know what do they expect to hear from you, for example, and what will make you stand out from other candidates for just the very first call.
I don't know. I like for a screening call, it's still, I think it's important to, one thing that you've probably seen, whether it's a CV or interview or whatever I say, is come prepared. First impressions matter. So think of what could be red flags for them. Think of, why are they doing a screening interview? What are they screening for? I don't know. But what I know is, say, when my first job at Combustion Science and Engineering, I just called, my former lab mate of mine, Stephen Olenek, and I said, hey, Stephen, there's a lot of people from the FETS lab, which was Jose Torrero's lab at the University of Maryland, the Fire Engineering Thermal Sciences lab, that are working with you. Could I stop by and see the lab and see the place? He said, sure, I'll set it up. And then I think the day before I was coming, he's like, put on a suit and a tie. I think the CEO wants to talk with you after all. So basically, even if it's just a visit, it's just a screening. It is basic, they may call it a screening, but it's basically just a way for them to say, I want to do a very short interview before I do a second interview or a third interview. And this is because they're in position to, there's so many applying for some of the jobs, so they're doing this to be efficient on their side. So again, make sure that you do well enough there, and prepare well enough so that you get to the next round. So in your case, and anyone's case, think of it, and if it, it's online very often these days, don't do it like your current setting is not one for a screening interview. Book book a cell in a library or a professional setting for it, and make sure that, not like me, like this, sitting down like this. But one thing that I sometimes do is that I put my computer high up, so I stand, so that I'm more energetic. Maybe not for an interview, but if if it's a quick formal conversation, it could sometimes be, say if they ask you to make a presentation. When I was teaching during COVID, I would typically put my computer a bit higher up so that I could stand, because I found that when I was sitting, I lost some of the things that I can do and the energy moving around when I'm talking to somebody and trying to be convincing in giving a message. So think of those details like that too, but mostly, and ask them, is there anything in particular I should prepare for this?
Okay.
If they don't say, oh, nothing is special, then yeah. But you can always ask them what's important for them.
Okay, thank you.
Is there anyone has a question for Professor Grunde? If no, I have one final question, which is, speaking of interviews, everyone goes to the interview prepared with answers and expected questions. But what if like a new question came up, or like I put in a situation that I couldn't answer the question? Like I didn't hear this question before, so how can I tackle this thing?
There's always techniques, right, for interviews, and this is where I mentioned in this sort of role play. So one thing is to do mock interviews with some friends. Try to, because, and this is where it also goes down to this. It may seem like a standard question, and it may be a standard question, but in like when you're a bit stressed and you've talked about this thing, you don't recognize it as a standard question. So maybe sit down, 5 minutes, 10 minutes sometimes to your friend, and they ask you something, and then ask them to throw in something irrelevant, not completely stupid, but something that is a little bit off script. And then practice on how do you encounter those. There's like, well, you can buy time. Sometimes you can also go back and say, hey, I'm not sure that I could capture exactly what you're looking for there. So could you rephrase it in another context? It's fair to say, like, hey, I didn't quite understand this, or you can clarify it to yourself with a question back. So for example, in my interview for the BRE chair 9 years ago, they asked the rector, the then rector of the University of Edinburgh, said, and there were 10 people on the side and me on the one side of the table. They say, are you interested? Do you think you would in the future be interested in sitting on this side of the table? So I said, so I said, are you asking me if I'm interested in leadership roles rather than just professor role? Because the people on the other side of the table here represent a very large, a very varied ensemble of people. He said, no, I'm asking if you're interested in academic leadership role. So, I countered it with a question, being a little, funny, being a little bit relaxed about it, and say, hey, can you please clarify that?
Okay. Thank you, Professor, so much.
And also just finally on that is that I have this is not something, it's nothing wrong, and this is where scripting, where planning, working on like, with people on it, you could use. It is not something that I've reflected very much on, so I don't think it's worthwhile for me to hypothesize on this topic right now. Like it's not something I considered very deeply, so I'm not comfortable elaborating particularly on that topic right now. It's okay to defer a question.
Okay. Yeah. Perfect. Thank you.